In this lecture, we'll have a deep dive into the delivery configuration. We'll have a look at how it's configured. We'll have a look at all of the detailed configuration. And after that, we'll have a look at the business case and use our knowledge of the configuration and the process to build the business case. So we'll have a look at the delivery types. We'll have a look at the item categories for the deliveries and how that works. We'll actually revisit the incomplete procedure and the delivery block. Now, we've already done this in the sales order, but it's good to refresh our knowledge, to reinforce our knowledge of these two items, because they represent an end-to-end flow of how these work. Okay, so we know that a particular document type represents, in effect, a process. So one particular document type will represent how a process works. So for example, if we look at the document type LF here on the start, LF, it represents an outbound delivery, and it's created usually with reference to a sales order. It's the most common used document, and every time you would create an LF document, it's always with reference to a sales order. Note a word here: if you are building a process for the delivery, it's better to either reuse the standard document type, or if you have to change it, copy it and create a Z1. Next we have the LO. Next is the LO document type, which is where you create a delivery without reference to a sales order in SAP, or to be more exact, in the current SAP system. And why would I say that? Why would you create a delivery that has no reference to a sales order or a purchase order? And because as a business process, you would want that. You would want the delivery to be from somewhere. And the biggest reason you would do that is when the demand to create a delivery comes from an external system. So let's say your sales order, or your purchase order, or your stock transport order is created in another system, maybe another SAP system, maybe in a totally different legacy system, and rather than recreate that, let's say that sales order back into the current SAP box, you just send, let's say, an IDOC or a message to create that delivery on its own in that current system. So it might be that the sales order is in one system and the delivery is another, and that is the reason why you would want to create a delivery without reference to anything. Next you have the document type LR, which is used for returns. Now returns actually means that the stock actually increases, but from an SAP perspective, it's still an outbound delivery, and only the material movement type is causing the increase in stock. From a process point of view, it's still handled and managed as a type of outbound delivery. Then we have document type NL, which is a replenishment from a stock transport order. We have document type LP, which is from projects. We have LB, which is from the subcontracting process, and we'll have a look at that in a separate lecture, the subcontracting process, and it's from a purchase order. And finally we have the inbound document type EL, which is an inbound delivery that represents the incoming materials from a purchase order. So as you can see, all of these document types represent a particular process, and my suggestion is to reuse these document types whenever possible, and only copy and enhance if you ever want to change it. Never ever create the document type on your own from scratch. Always copy from something. So let's now have a look at the configuration for the delivery header. We'll look at all the items in that delivery, and we can see what each component of the configuration does. So let's start off as usual, SPRO. Let's go to the configuration. I go to the reference IMG as usual, and I go to logistics, execution, shipping, deliveries, define delivery types. So this is all of them. That's the one we want. Define delivery types, and we also have the define item categories here, and we'll have a look at that in a bit later on. But let's have a look at the define delivery types first. And as you can see, here is all the delivery header types, the document types. Let's look at LF, our favorite, and let's have a look at the details. So you can see on the top here, this is so here is the configuration, and the first thing you see is the delivery type LF. You see a description, so delivery, or you can change it to outbound delivery, however you want it. You then have the document category, that tells you what type of document is it. So J is a standard delivery, H is a return, for example, so J, H, and you have others here as well. But it's a category that's been used for reporting, and it drives some of the configuration in the background. So usually you'll see either H for returns or J for delivery. And as I said before, if you ever wanted to create a new document type, always copy so that you get the right document category. We have the number usage, to both internal and external. That is just a number range. We have also the item number, how many it jumps, so 10, 20, 30, 40, just like in the sales order. And I would suggest you would just keep it the same as in the sales order, so you have a one-to-one match. And it's important to just repeat that a little bit. When you have an item on the sales order and you copy it into the delivery, the system actually redetermines the numbers. That's why you want to keep it the same as the sales order. If you have it different, then in the sales order it might be item 10, and in the delivery it might be item 5. Very confusing for everybody. So keep it the same as the sales order, and it'll be the same most of the other time. For the order required, we see the reference document that the delivery must be linked to. In this case, X is sales order required. If you had nothing, then it'll be the blank one. Also, you have U, which is purchase order, R, return delivery from vendor, L, subcontracting, and so forth. So here is where you drive the preceding document of the delivery. And in most cases you will have create delivery with reference to something, so that's where you configure it. The default order type, that one is not so much used, we can skip it. The item requirements here is how you define, if you create a new item on the delivery, let's say a packaging material that you create that's not in a sales order, or if you manually type a new item, or for example if through material determination you have an extra item on the delivery, how does the system behave in that way? And the rule 202, for example, tells you the behavior. For the storage location rule and the delivery determination, output determination, you will all see that it's been grayed out. This means that it's just information only, and you change the configuration. You change the configuration somewhere else. So it's only here for information. The storage location rule you'll configure when you do your picking. And as we saw before, the route determination is actually in the route configuration. So it's only information at the moment, you can see here. So don't worry because it's grayed out, it's just configured somewhere else. The delivery split by warehouse number. As you know, the warehouse is determined by storage location and plant. And you could have an issue where you have two storage locations which point to different plants, and if you flag this, you force the delivery to split, which is the right thing to do. And if you, by default, I leave it on, so it's extra safe. The delivery split for partners is to say, if I have different partners like the freight forwarder or the ship to party, then force a split. Now by default I don't do this, I always leave it off, and it forces the additional partners to be on item level. It makes life easier, but if you do really need to split by additional partners, this is where you would do it. Okay, next we have automatic packing. Let me close this first. We then have rescheduling, which says, do I want to recalculate my deadlines? And you have option X, which is recalculate, okay, if it's in the past, recalculate if the routes have changed, and then reschedule after relevant changes. So when should you use this? It's important because each recalculation has a little bit of performance impact. And I only turn this on if I have two options. Yeah, if the business is normal, standard, they always create the delivery on time, you don't really need rescheduling because you know 99.9% of the time the deliveries will be created on the right day and you'll have the right dates. If, for example, you always change the route and the routes have a longer and shorter lead time, then you would choose option Y. Just say recalculate, but only if the routes have changed. And option X is if you constantly create deliveries that are late. For example, export deliveries. Yeah, so you're not sure really when you want to ship it, for example, and you could say for a particular delivery type for export, always reschedule because you know that you're always going to create the deliveries late. You might as well recalculate it. Yeah, so rule of thumb, if you always create the delivery on time, no need to reschedule. If you change the route, you can choose option Y. If you always create the delivery late, then choose option X. For the automatic packing, this means that when you create the delivery, automatically run through the packing proposal and create the suggested packing. Now, this goes obviously with the packing functionality and handling unit functionality, which we will see later. But just know that if you set this, the system will turn on the packing proposal. And you would do this if there's easy, constant rules on how to pack something. If a particular delivery always requires a user to decide how to pack it, then maybe you shouldn't use the automatic packing proposal. Again, we'll have a look at this later on. The generate packing material item just says that if you do the packing, when you save the delivery, take the items, because they are materials that you use for the packaging, and put it as a delivery item at the bottom. Okay, so we'll have a look at this later. So let's have a look at the next config. The next is a screen sequence grouping. That means just says if I press tab, how does it jump from field to field? The display range, I'm not sure myself. I always keep it at all items. So that is the configuration for the delivery header. So now let's have a look at the configuration on the item level. And if you go to SPRO, it's under the header shipping, deliveries, define item categories. And the item categories you see here is the same logic as in the sales order. Whatever item categories in the sales order, you would copy into the delivery, and that's the item category in the delivery. So let's have a look at the standard one that we've been looking at, tan. So if I put tan here, it has an item category. That's the standard one. So let's have a look in detail what it is. And the first thing we have is document category. Now by default, I always leave it as J. It's part of the delivery. Next, we have the material number, 0 allowed. Now, by default, what this means is you would allow where the material number is blank, and you would flag it to say yes, you would allow it, or no, you won't. By default, I don't allow it because you really want that consistency. If you allow the users to randomly in the material number to put anything they want, it tends to be difficult both on the reporting side and maybe on the billing side. So what I always do is if there's a particular service that you want to allow them to use, then you would have a particular material number for service. Let's say packing, you might have a specific material number that would appear on the invoice as packing. If you wanted to have free text or you want to have notes that would appear on the delivery, I usually tell them to use the free text functionality rather than adding a new item line. But it depends on the business, as always in all of these things, but at least you know now what is the best practice of allowing material numbers or not allowing items that don't have material numbers. The item category statistic group is used for sys reporting. Also, you can use it for BW reporting. It just groups particular item categories together. So, for example, you could have return item categories as one group, another. You could have, this is the stock determination rule. It's usually set by and it just says how you run down the material. Do you use maybe a batch number, maybe FIFO, LIFO, and so forth. It's better to allow to populate this. I usually do. They just tell you how the material is to be run down by batch and so forth. Next is check quantity is 0. So when you create the delivery, what happens if the delivery quantity is 0? You have 3 options here. You can do nothing. You can just make a log of the problem. You can generate an error message in create or change mode, and you create an error message only in create mode. So it's up to you. Maybe you would allow 0 items. Depends on the business. Again, check the minimum quantity. It's the same logic. And check over delivery. Obviously, when you do the post goods issue, if you posting more than the material, do you want to make a note of it? Do you want to make an error and so forth? By default, I make a note of error. Next, we have availability check, whether you turn it on or off. Blank is you turn it on. So what this means is when you create the delivery, you either can say blank, check availability, X, don't do anything, or Y, do not check availability when reporting results of picking request. So the question is, when would you turn it on? When would you turn it off? Checking availability is quite resource intensive. So if, for example, you would turn it off if A, you don't care whether you have material or not. This could be because you have a particular scenario called fill or kill, which means you don't really care. You will do that through the picking stage. For example, it could be a business case, or you would always, if you don't have enough, manufacture enough for the customer. That's one. So in that case, you don't care about availability. The other reason is that you run the ATP rescheduling and then immediately you create the delivery. Right? In that case, you could turn off ATP check when you create the delivery. And the reason is this. When you run the ATP rescheduling, you're actually doing an ATP check. And then immediately after that, you create the delivery. So why do the ATP check twice? That's really the justification. Again, it depends on the business situation and what business you're in. Yeah. By default, I tend to leave the ATP check on. And I suggest you would do so unless there's a big performance issue. Sometimes businesses, they want to create all the deliveries within a certain time and so forth, and maybe it takes too long. Maybe this time you might want to turn off ATP. Then we have the whether or not it's supposed to be packed, and you have 3 options. It can be packed, it must be packed, or it can never be packed. By default, I leave it blank so that I have the flexibility. In the future, I can say, yes, this material could be packed, and I don't have to go back and change the configuration.